and that is a big deal. Like that is the one thing that allows canning to be where it is today.
Welcome to Behind the Shelf, a podcast about how everyday products are made. My name is Tarek.
And my name is Amar, and we are your hosts.
Welcome back, listener. We're here gonna be talking today about soup cans or canned soups. So essentially, all of those ready to heat, ready to consume cans of soup, essentially Campbell's soup. So I'm eager to learn about the process,
Don't
and
forget
I'm
about
eager.
Heinz, okay? Heinz is big too.
Heinz is big too?
I like Heinz tomato soup. That's my jam. Personally, Heinz tomato soup is my jam.
I think outside of Heinz tomato soup, Campbell kind of owns the market, no?
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna argue. Campbell does own the market. And I was gonna ask you, but you brought up Campbell's anyway. I want to tell you a fun fact.
Ooh, we're starting with fun facts. Hit me.
Well, you already said Campbell's. I was gonna surprise you with they're the biggest canned soup manufacturer in the world.
In the world, not just in North America.
World,
wow.
globally. And they make 440 million cans of soup a year.
Wow.
440 million cans. And if you equate that 100 cans per second. 100 cans.
That's a lot. That's a lot. That's a good fun fact. 100 cans a second sounds like a lot more than 400 million a year, to be honest with you. Just when you put it in that perspective, it sounds a lot. Which are the countries that are consume the stuff the most?
Yeah, and no surprise here. I mean, North America and Europe. And that makes sense, right? Because we fill our pantries up with, non-perishable goods, and we tend to have that kind of space, that accessibility. And so it makes sense that it's Canada, US, and the European countries.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think it also has to do with certain cultures where they endorse eating out more. They endorse the kind of the idea of pre-made food. And there are other cultures where they value more like homemade cooking and cooking at home and not eating out as much.
Absolutely.
So I can see that as well there, especially in our hustle culture, especially in the US, where you're always want to be doing something and people don't. Cooking is not really part of the culture, so people want to eat whatever, and something like this is cheap. So
are you
that box.
Like, do you drink soup?
I love soup. Are you kidding me?
Are you a canned soup?
I make soup. I make soup. Yeah.
Okay. Like
is that a flex? I am flexing now.
That could.
I love soup.
That could be a flex.
I make pretty good tomato soup. So you said you like Heinz. I wonder, should make you one day. Tomato soup.
One day.
And I do pretty good like vegetable and chicken soup as well. So these are my two go-to. I do lentil soup as well and other stuff, but these are my top two. What about you?
Heinz tomato soup is the only thing in my pantry, to be honest.
Dang.
Only Heinz.
You're loyal.
Soup. I tried Campbell's tomato soup. Heinz and Campbell's noodle soup. I know that was very popular. I don't know if it was popular. The alphabet soup when I was growing up was very popular.
Of course.
But I just never liked it. That pasta in a can kind of just tastes weird. So tomato soup in a can is like my personal favorite. And then I'll have like garlic bread toast or like butter toast, and then I'll just dip it in the soup.
Oh. That's it. I think the Heinz one is more premium also, right? Doesn't it feel more premium compared to the...
Well, now it's at the dollar store, so I don't know about premium.
Not anymore?
Not anymore.
Maybe I'm thinking of Maybe I'm thinking of something else. I'm thinking of those cups. I don't know if you've seen those new cups. You can microwave the cup and you drink it from the cup. So it's not a can, I suppose. It's more of a ready-to-heat cup, and you just drink it from the cup. Yeah, maybe I'm thinking of that. I've seen those in the store. My mouth is watering just thinking about this stuff. Can you imagine? I just had dinner. But Campbell's soup even have had those now. Those ready to heat. They look premium from the packaging. I didn't get a chance to try them, but those look nice for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's. Where do we start? So, when does the idea of canned soups start in history? I'm sure this is something as an idea of storing food and preserving food, it existed, but in a can, I think it's an appropriate place to start in this episode.
Yeah, you're right. And the idea came from food preservation. And the first, major milestone is in 1795. Napoleon. You remember Napoleon?
I've heard of him. I've heard of him.
The great Napoleon, he was like, okay, I need something from my army. I need something that can keep food relatively fresh, increase shelf life. And so he gave a cash prize out to whoever who can develop a method for better food preservation. And a guy named Nicholas, who was a French baker slash chef, he came up with an idea and it won the actual cash prize. His idea was to pack food in a glass jar, seal the glass jar, and then boil the glass jar. And that was a method that was employed by Napoleon's army. He was a baker and a chef, so he's already in the food industry. He's already doing some of these packagings. But this really got him thinking, okay, how do I do this? And he came up with this method, increased shelf life, and it increased food preservation. And this was employed by Napoleon's army.
So what was unique about what that chef did that made the idea succeed? How was it different than what was available at the time? And also, I guess another question is, what was available at the time that Napoleon didn't think appropriate?
It was basic storage, right? Think of just putting in a glass jar and just closing it, or think of tin and just putting a lid on the tin. That's it. But this guy did, he sealed it. So it's not just closing it. He like fully sealed it and he boiled it, making all the microorganisms decrease to a better level. Spoilage organisms don't survive that general process of boiling, right? And that boiling method in water, that immersion method, and with the sealing of glass itself. And so that worked out.
Okay. So he started that kind of idea of sealing it. This is kind of done right now where they, in a manufacturing setting for food, they cook it, put it in a clean jar or a can, and then seal it. And that creates that seal thing, that pop. That tell you that do not consume if it's if it's open or something. What is it called? The quality seal, not the quality seal. What do they call it?
If the button is like popped up, don't.
Yeah,
don't
the button thing. Yeah, and I've actually done it at home before, where if you seal something while it's still warm, like even in a mason jar, it'll cause that same effect. So that's how they do it in a manufacturing setting, and this is how this guy did it essentially. This guy actually, yeah, that's pretty advanced thinking. So at what point did we transition to using tin cans for food?
Yeah. So in 1810, a gentleman named Peter Durrant, who was a British merchant, he had an issue with glass. So this method, glass was shattering, glass wasn't easy to transport. And so what this guy did, he actually put same food, in a tin can. So after the boiling method, he would put it in a tin can and seal it. So now you have a sealed tin can. What he found was it's easier to transport, easier for storage, and it's more durable than the actual glass jar. So he would use the same method, but instead of a glass jar, he would be using a tin can.
So that makes sense. And we kind of touched on that in our milk episode a while back when they transitioned from glass into carton or paper. It was for the same exact reason. Glass breaks, it's heavy. It's a pain to work with. So I can see why they wanted to move away from that then even. So he was a merchant, so that means he was kind of
buying,
trading with food that is handled in glass jar. When that happened, so when he did that, did he add the cooked food in the can and then seal it, or did he cook it in the can like it was done before with the glass jar?
Correct. The latter one. So just that same method, swap the jar with the tin can. Exactly what he did. He wasn't like a food developer. He wasn't an innovative guy. He was a businessman. So he wanted to minimize losses, increase trade, and just make it easier on his business. And so he developed this method. Just basically food in a tin can, seal it, boil it, and then he goes palletizes it.
And then is that what caused it to blow up internationally to be used, or did it
So
need another
improper.
push?
Okay, the blow up thing. I'm glad we'll loop back in when we talk
Oh
about
boy, what did
quality
I
and
do?
stuff. But improper sealing of material like tin
Yeah.
leads to swelling of the can. You have all these issues, and so that's exactly one of the problems with this specific method is the sealing was not tight enough. It wasn't a hermetically sealed canister like we see today, right? They had that issue.
hmm
But at that time, this was the best solution out there.
Okay, so that was some of the issues. Were there any other milestones or developments in that stage that happened that caused it to kind of be more reliable? And at what point did it actually get more common and get commercialized and actually replace jars, glass jars, on a commercial scale?
Yeah, well, we named the company before, Campbell's Soup Company.
There
In
you go.
1897, a chemist that worked for the Campbell Soup Company, Dr. John Durrance, he, well, this is where he put soup in a can. But it wasn't just regular. He condensed. He found a way to condense soup and put it in a can. Now, condensed soup means low water activity, right? Less water, meaning he can have the can a bit smaller. So now the cans are the size we are used to today. And he did that. This is the guy that did that. He was able to put condensed soup in a can.
Wow, that idea of selling condensed products now it gets sold as a environmentally friendly and sustainability lens to it, because it obviously saves you a lot of, instead of shipping water, you can just have the consumer add water to it. They actually have been doing that with all-purpose cleaners. There's this company that
Oh,
is
yes. That's right.
they have like this concentrated small vial size of concentrated chemical, essentially, or the
Yeah.
all-purpose cleaner container, and then you can put it over 30 ounce or something of water, and then you mix it up, and then you can use it like regular. So the idea of concentration is pretty brilliant, and I can't believe we don't do it more in other areas.
Yeah, across the board. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so Campbell Soup is essentially the pioneer of putting soup in a can, which explains why they are to this day still dominating the market in
The
that space.
juggernaut.
Yeah, juggernaut, yes. And I feel like they're pretty much known for that. I'm sure they have a lot of other products that
It's in
they
their
sell.
name.
It's Campbell Soup. They're stuck to soups. If I was a betting man, I'm betting they're gonna be changing their name to Campbell's and then start selling other products. Like, I mean, they
Who knows?
they own other brands, so that's their way of growing outside of that space, but totally different brands, not under the Campbell brand name. Okay, so is this essentially when the evolution of Canada in a soup kind of stopped and the industry kind of stabilized to where we see it now, or has there been any developments that took place that brought it to where we are now?
So after this, I mean, Campbell Soup Company and these companies, nothing innovative happened. As you can see, soup in a can in a in a metal can still exists today. Minor changes here and there, the crimping, design, size, whatever. Right. One thing did occur is double seaming. The sealing technology improved
Mm-hmm.
significantly, and it wasn't just a single seam around the can, one seal. It's double seam. So if you see, the seam is like a hook. It's hooked
Yeah.
onto the middle portion, and it's hermetically sealed. The seal is phenomenal nowadays, and that is a big deal. Like that is the one thing that allows canning to be where it is today.
Yeah, I can see that, because then you no longer have leakage issues. You don't have any spoilage issues, or premature spoilage, I should say. So I can see how that can unlock a lot of increased shelf life on those products, especially when you have food in a can. So you just mentioned John Dorrance as the chemist that was working for Campbell's Soup Company that developed this idea essentially of selling condensed soup in a can.
Yeah.
So that tells me that the company did exist before that. Were they just selling soup in a glass jar before that? What
That's a
was
good
their
question.
method of selling soup?
Basically, it was food in a can. So it would be tomatoes, carrots, peas, whatever in a can. And originally it
But
was called
not.
Campbell and Co. It was called Campbell and Co. And once the advent that Dr. John did with the condensed
Mhm.
soup, then they renamed and became Campbell Soup Company.
That must have exploded because that was
Big
happening.
money.
I mean, I can see that because that's happening at a time where convenience is starting to become more valuable or more perceived more valuably because now you're getting into the industrial revolution and time starting to equal money. So you want something quick for your lunch break at time and convenience
It,
for something like this. And
it
construction
was
workers, I
actually
would
that,
imagine.
but a little bit more because I mentioned this and I briefly touched on it. The size of the can was rather large, right? And because now you're able to condense the soup, condense the material inside, you're able to condense the can as well. So the can got smaller as well,
It's more
which was a big
portable
deal.
as well. Yeah.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. What about BPA? Because BPA lining and tin cans are kind of associated with each other. And I know some people that to this day would not, they perceive that canned food is not good for you because of this stuff, even though a lot of cans don't have that. They have that claim BPA free. Did they have BPA lining at the time? Why do they have BPA lining? Tell me about
Yeah.
BPA, I suppose.
So first of all, nowadays cans BPA free, right? They use epoxy
For the most part,
polyester
I
coating.
still see some brands have it, but
Yeah,
for the
for the
most
most
part,
part,
yeah, I
the
think
big
we're out
guys.
of it. Yes.
Yeah, we're so don't be hesitant. I mean, just read the label. Just because it's in a can doesn't mean it's going to cause something. And as for the start of Campbell's Soup Company, there was no BPA lining at this time. It was simply a can. And what's happening was the food was coming into contact with the tin, and over time it caused a corrosion, and the food got contaminated. And it was a big deal, right? And in 1950s, what happened was they introduced this lining. So they would coat the inside of the can with BPA, which is bisphenol A.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a resin coat. And what it would do is create a barrier layer between the food and the can. And so it, prevented food contamination and prevented the corrosion of the can, therefore increasing stability of the can and durability of the food inside the can.
So that increases shelf life, essentially, makes the product last longer before you start to see any corrosion, especially if you're packing tomatoes or something acidic in it that can cause it to corrode the can faster. So that BPA lining is in there to extend the shelf life of the product. Does it actually cause cancer? Because the move to move away from BPA is generally perceived about cancer because it causes cancer, it has cancer risk. How true is that? Is that legit, or is it just like someone
So
said something and it caught on?
this has been a discussion point for a long time, right? So
Hmm.
there's still, and I want to make sure that there's still a lot of research that's still ongoing in this specific topic. And so I want to preface this by saying there is no definitive evidence linking BPA directly to cancer. But
Hmm.
there are a lot of studies, and a lot of studies are ongoing, a lot of studies saying that there is a known factor in BPA with endocrine disruptors. Basically, what it means is it disrupts your hormonal body,
Hmm.
hormones, and that specific thing is leading and may cause cancer or cancer-like symptoms. And so that's where this issue is. Again, lots of research is going on in the field. But at this current moment, there is no direct definitive link.
That seems scary enough for me to avoid BPA. Can't be honest, or anything
Yeah,
that
just
has
be safe.
BPA.
Yeah.
Especially now that they have the options where everything is BPA free. I I'm that sounds like good enough to avoid until they conclude that it does not.
Yeah, just like
For
lead
the
in your
time being.
Maggie noodles. Just avoid it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, Maggie. Okay. So I'm thinking through the can. We talked about BPA, talked about the seal, talked about the size. Anything else that we may have missed about the history of and the can and can in a soup, or soup in a can rather, before we jump into how it's made nowadays?
No, let's talk how it's made. We're ready to
Let's
go.
do it. Okay. Where do you want to start with manufacturing?
Yeah, so let's start with ingredient preparation, right? As anything occurs, you get the
So
raw
maybe,
materials.
sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt you. So maybe what we do, we can take an example of a specific soup. You can talk about tomato soup, or we can talk about chicken noodle soup. That one is also very popular. We can pick that and talk through the manufacturing of that specifically, so we have a better visual of how that process works. Does that work?
sure. I mean, generally all the same, but let's say this soup has tomato soup. Let's say it has some meat in it, and let's say it has some peas and carrots. Cool?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So peas and carrots come into the factory. It is washed. It is rinsed. All the pesticide, all that is rinsed away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then it's cutting. The dicer machine dices up all the carrots. All the peas are processed, ready to go, and the tomatoes are all cut, chopped up, and the meat. So let's say is chicken meat or whatever, right? It's cleaned, it's cut, and it's diced up or minced depending on what the soup is, right?
So the vegetables come in a tote format? Do they come in a big container? How do they come in? And do they come in frozen, or are they fresh?
So depending on the soup manufacturer, right? It could
Okay.
peas and carrots could come in a big frozen tote, or depending on the volume, let's say Campbell's Soup Company probably gets it in a giant truck with a flatbed full of carrots from the farm
Mm-hmm.
because they have the direct vertical integration with farms. And so they would get the whole carrots in, they would wash the carrots, they would prep the carrots, cut them, put them on a dicer machine. It dices up everything, and now it's ready to go.
Okay, and do they dice the vegetables separately, or do they put all the vegetables that they want? Say I'm making that soup that you mentioned has carrot and has peas. Do they? Well, peas you don't have to chop them, but let's say you have hypothetical soup that has multiple vegetables that you need to chop. Do they chop them separately and then mix, or do they mix and then
Separate.
chop?
Separate.
Okay, so
Yeah,
each
because
has its own process. That makes
correct.
sense.
So yeah.
That makes sense.
So sometimes the specification has cubed carrots, but it may have whole broccoli or like whole
Mm.
small floret
Mm.
of broccoli.
Hmm.
And so you can't add everything together. Chop it is gonna mess your spec up. So they do everything. All the raw materials are treated separately.
Separately, and then once it's ready to be probably
Correct.
cooked or something like. But okay, I have a question about when they cook them, but I'll ask you then.
All right. So next, basically, you want to put everything together, right? So the mixing step comes first, and then I'll think of a large, big mixing tank. All these ingredients are added in, and it's thoroughly stirred, mixed properly.
Hmm.
Not high shear mixing, just stirred. Think of your pot in your house, stirred, nice, homogeneous, soupy batch material ready to go.
And this is where essentially the soup is made. It sounds like that's where.
Yeah, water, sugar, salt, pepper, carrots, peas, whatever is added now in this current step.
And meat, if there's meat.
And meat.
So that's a cooking tank. Okay, so what about when they. Now, this is my question about cooking. So if I'm doing like broccoli and onions, they have a different cooking time.
Yes.
How do they handle that? How do they manage that?
So what product developers do and the thermal processing experts will do is you would add everything into the batch, and your temperature and time and pressure will be based on the overall full recipe, not individual. So it's not like, oh, I can cook my broccoli floret in 5 minutes, but my peas and carrots come frozen, so they're going to be in this. I need 30 minutes. No, it's the total recipe. The total recipe as a whole gets a formulation and gets a temperature, pressure, time.
Okay, so that wouldn't cause anything to overcook while you're waiting. Like for my example, we're talking about the broccoli. If I'm waiting, if my recipe calls for 30 minutes because the chicken or the broccoli needs that time, my onions are going to be destroyed by then. So when I'm eating that soup, it's going to be like very
So
mushy.
that's the fine balance that product developers have to balance on, is you need to cook it, but not so it becomes mush. I had an issue when I was, back in the day, we were
Hmm.
trying to put couscous in a pouch and retort that pouch. Now, the beans were okay, but the couscous was mush. So we had to go and tweak the thermal processing to correct that cooking situation. Maybe add less gums and stuff like that. So the product developer has to balance that fine line.
I see. I see. It's a lot different than how I cook it at home,
It's
I
not.
suppose.
It's not like I add all
Yeah.
this. Then let's go 10 minutes. Let's get out of here. Oh my! Or cook it separately
Yeah.
and then add all to it together.
Yeah. I see. I see. Okay. So that kettle where everything is cooked, that is essentially going to give you the final product, right? Because you've cooked everything, now it's ready. So what happens after the product is cooked? What quality checks take place? Are there any further processing that need to happen at this point before we fill it, or is that pretty much finished product?
So similar to when we talked about quality checks when we were talking about the ready to heat rice. Similar, right? The whoever's the batch operator is looking at temperature, is looking at viscosity, is looking at how many vegetables he or she has in their certified batch. Looking at, okay, is everything okay? Totally, does it look right? Does it smell right? And then they release it into the next stage.
How does this get conveyed into the filling area and the filling machine without destroying the vegetables, without crushing the vegetables and the meat chunks and all that? How do you preserve that as you're moving things?
So they're using positive displacement pumps. And remember that because we're talking about thick product and actual like chunks of stuff, their piping is rather large as well.
Yeah, and so positive displacement pumps are essentially pumps that are able to push the product without putting a lot of pressure on it. So it helps preserve the texture of the product, and it helps preserve the, in this case, we're talking about chunks of vegetables. It helps preserve that. So it doesn't apply a lot of pressure on it as it's pushing it in those pipes. It's kind of just pushing it through the process. I don't think we've
Absolutely.
ever talked about positive displacement pumps in our podcast, at least.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Okay, so I would imagine that goes into some sort of a small hopper in the filling station, and that gets filled. Tell us about the filling. What's unique about it? How fast it goes, and the labeling and all that.
Yeah. So empty cans are first sterilized. They go through a machine where steam is sprayed, or steam is it goes through a steam tunnel. And in this, it's sterilized, comes out the other end, and it's allowed to cool down before it's being used. Now, similar to a lot of food manufacturers, it goes into a big hopper, and then that is fed through nozzles that feed each can individually. And so it is filled in, and it's hot fill, right? It's not like the soup upstairs or whatever in batching is cooled down and then you put it in. No, the soup, as soon as it's ready, is hot filled into the can. And the reason why they do this is they want to reduce air in the can, and they want to create a certain amount of headspace before they seal it. So that's why they do
So
that.
that when they seal it and then it cools down, it creates that vacuum inside and essentially makes it last longer, right?
Bingo. Yeah, that's right.
All right. So filled, capped, and is the cap just pressed on, or is there something unique about how the cap is done?
I briefly mentioned when we were talking about initial sealing in the milestones we were talking about. Now,
Yeah.
what happens, the as the can moves underneath the lidding machine, arm guides the lid on top. As a seam is applied, so there's two seams. If you look at any can, it's double seamed. And so an
Yeah.
initial seam puts the lid in place, and another then crimper adds additional
Yes.
seal onto it. And if you see, it looks like a hook. It's not just the lid that's like folded over. You'll see it's almost like hooked in, and that there's two like seals around it. We'll flash up the image of a can in the zoomed in version, but you'll see it's double seam. And so because of that, that seal is applied, and now it's hermetically sealed.
And I believe even the can comes in with like that ending of the can where the cap is applied comes in kind of bent a little bit that allows
Yes.
for that hooking mechanism to essentially work, right? It's both the
Yeah,
can that comes out that way, and then
that's right.
the lid is kind of bent around that.
Correct. Correct. So a lot of times, and now most of the times actually, the can is already pre-seamed on the upper lip. So the manufacturer has less things to do.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So what happens next? So there's going to be the coding, the general process of coding, labeling, and packing. Is that it? Is there anything?
One more step: thermal
X-rays? Do they
processing,
need to check?
sterilizing.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about a high shelf life product, right? So cooking is just regular cooking is not enough. You gotta go the extra mile. So what they do is they go through thermal processing. They do retorts. If you remember, we talked about retorts in our rice episode. And so there's a different retorts that exist. It could be a steam air retort, or it could be a water immersion retort. Essentially, they work the same way as they apply steam, pressure, or high temperature water with pressure to cook the inside to a certain temperature. And that's what happens. They go through retorting process. Depends on what the recipes are. It varies.
So this is the same. So this is like it's like an oven, right? This is like an oven or a steam room
Think
that
air
all the cans
fryer.
go inside. Yeah, air fryer. Okay, okay. So you're
Yeah.
just
So
blowing hot air in an
yeah, for
enclosed
steam air
environment, and you
retorts.
have your cans.
Yeah. So for steam air retorts, think air fryer. For water immersion, think of fryer, but instead of oil, it's like water.
Which one is more popular? I would imagine the first one. Seems
Steam air retorts.
cleaner.
Steam air retorts are very, very, very popular, um,
Yeah.
because you're not wasting water as much, and you're using a lot of pressure and a minimal amount of water, and you're using a big fan to circulate that hot air around, and so that's very common.
Yeah, that sounds like the cleaner way from a manufacturing, because once you have to worry about the water, that's a whole different issue you have to deal with. You know, you have to replace this water every so often, and then you have this wet can you have to dry. Blowing hot air seems to be a lot easier. So, and you mentioned cooking, but did you actually mean like they're? I understand they're intending to raise the temperature of the product for preservation, but there's no actual cooking at the stage of the product, right? This is done. All we're doing here, raising it to a specific temperature. What's
For
the
spoilage
temperature that?
microorganisms, yeah. So there's a
Okay,
certain
what's the
target
temperature they
range.
shoot for?
It could be up to 250 Fahrenheit, so 150 Celsius, around that. And the pressure, it depends on the retort and product. And because cans, they probably apply maybe 1 bar, 2 bar, depending on that.
Okay, so that sounds like almost like flash cooking. So they're gonna raise it so much, and then they would cool it down, and then they pack it, right? Because you're
Correct.
gonna have to cool it
Correct.
down quick enough. Otherwise, you're just gonna be overcooking the can, or not the can, the product inside the can, and then also handling it after the labeling and all of that. So you raise
Yeah.
it to that 220, 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you
You let it cool down. And
drop
then,
that temperature quickly, and then you continue handling it.
correct.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so sterile, sealed. What's left? Just the labeling, I would imagine,
Just
right? And
labeling. And
best buy code.
uh, yeah, yeah. So for those that are listening to our episodes, the labeling of the can is similar to how the jars are labeled in mayonnaise, right? Um, glue a glue layer is quickly applied as the product is spinning, and a sleeve, almost like a rectangular sleeve, gets applied, and as it twists, it's labeling and pressing the label on the can, and the can just kicks off and goes into the rest of the packaging process, where either it's put in a case, it's put in a wrap, whatever the end product is, but your can is ready to go.
Any other quality checks that happen at this stage to make sure the packaging is good from like a label, or is that some like standard periodic checking? What about X-ray? Is there an X-ray?
Yeah, there is an inline X-ray prior to the canning. So as the product is going from the kettle or the batching tanks to the filling, there's an inline X-ray or inline metal detector that is catching this, because once in instant can, you have your final product ready to go.
So, talked about filling, talked about cooking. It seems pretty straightforward. You get your vegetables, and these are like fresh vegetables. You're getting your meat, you're cutting it, and you're just putting it all in a kettle, cooking it to the recipe that it calls for, adding all your spices and everything else, filling, capping and hooking, and then sterilizing, and then labeling. All right. Well, that was very mouth-watering. Thank you very much. I think I'm gonna go have a can of soup. I'm gonna try those new fancy ones that I told you about before, because they look pretty nice. I'm gonna give them a shot. So this episode, I'm gonna have to get some and then try them. Okay. So that's this podcast has been getting me to eat a lot of stuff that I don't usually eat as part of my diet. All right, thank you, Amar. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking us through this, and thank you to everyone for listening to Behind the Shelf. Let us know what you think. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. Let us know if you have any specific topic or an episode, or you have any feedback for us. Let us know. We appreciate it truly. With that, my name is Tarek.
And my name is Umar. Have a great day.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.